you hear Democrats constantly saying that we need more housing to solve homelessness. And this is an insane thought process to me because they are separate issues. The majority of the homeless are addicted or mentally ill.
Correct.
Both.
Over 80%. That's not an assertion. There are studies that have shown that real research is over 80%.
Right. So their idea is two-pronged. We need to hand out fentanyl needles and crack pipes, and then we need to give no-bid contracts to build high-rise structures in cities. And it's like, it's another high-speed rail boondoggle. It's money laundering, it's fraud, and I just sort of want to hear how you would address the homeless industrial complex and the homeless situation.
Well, you're totally right that it should be separated from the housing question. So first, it's very simple actually, and I can give you a sort of short-ish answer, and then point people if they want more to a longer answer. I'll start with that. The longer answer is a policy paper that I wrote. So one thing, just sort of context here, is that I've been working towards this for a number of years now. I started a policy organization called Golden Together about 3 years ago. It's just when I stopped doing my Fox show and just changed to being a contributor at Fox so that I could focus on California. Policy organization Golden Together. I've been traveling the state the last 3+ years, really learning about the problems, understanding what's gone wrong, talking to people, listening to Californians, and developing the solutions. And you'll see on that website at goldentogether.com, we've got policy papers on all these big issues, including on this. And there's a paper there called Ending Homelessness, so you can read that. But the short answer is it's actually pretty straightforward. It's three things. Number one, for homelessness, you've got to enforce the law. It is illegal to live on the streets. It's always been illegal. These homeless encampments are illegal. You're breaking the law when you do that. And so the first step is enforce the law. You've got to get people off the street. And for years, you've got no chance of solving the problem if people are on the street. It's just obvious common sense. You've got to remove them from the street. And for years, all these Democrats and some Republican, whatever, they've been hiding behind these court rulings. And the court, and it was, again, bullshit. I mean, I've really studied this. They hid behind this ruling. They called it the Boise ruling for Boise in Idaho. And the ruling is the Ninth Circuit. And they said, you can only remove people from the street if you've got sufficient shelter beds available for all the homeless population in your area. Right. And that's been interpreted here as meaning, apartments and permanent supportive housing, all this nonsense, that $1 million a unit for this stuff that they're building, which is all going into the pockets of their crony developers. Right. That's the corruption. But there was no definition of shelter. It could have been a bed in a tent, that's a sort of, temporary. But they hid behind that ruling and said, our hands are tied, we can't remove people. Not true. But now there's no excuse at all because that's been overturned in a Supreme Court ruling. It's actually the year before last, Grants Pass versus Oregon. And they overturned that. So there's no hiding place. You've got to just enforce the law. And I'm very clear about it. As governor, if local politicians and whatever won't enforce the law, I will use state law enforcement resources to remove people from the streets in California, wherever they are, whatever the local government is doing or not doing. That's number one. Number two, to your point, you have to get people, you can't just where are you going to put them? You've got to get them into what they need. And that's 2 and 3. Number 2 is treatment for addiction, because over 80% have drug or alcohol addiction or mental health problems or both. And so right now we have a law that was passed in 2016 known as Housing First, which means which directs that if you're in receipt of funding for homelessness, you cannot require sobriety, or you cannot require any kind of conditions to be put on that. So they put these, and I've seen it. I've seen it on the street in Venice and elsewhere. Venice down in LA, that you've got people, and it's described to me as a second home by actual people who are trying to help get these people's lives back on track. They give them a $1 million apartment. They call it permanent supportive housing. Don't require anything in terms of getting off drugs. These people are going back on the street to deal drugs or buy drugs because they're addicts.
Well, and not to mention, one of the worst things you can do to an addict is put them alone in a room.
Exactly right. It's a disaster. So it's a complete disaster. So even some of the Democrats know this. This last session, in the legislature, they passed a bill called the Sober Housing Bill, which would have taken just 10% of the money and said, well, just for 10% of it can be spent on housing or shelter that has drug or alcohol treatment connected to it, required. And the Democrat legislature with the 2/3 majority, they passed it. Newsom vetoed it. I mean, what a disgrace. So we've got to get around that. We've got to get around that. And if if it means taking money out of that system and putting it into, philanthropic channels where you've got lots of faith-based, community-based organizations that are doing the real work to get people off drugs and alcohol. So that's the second thing, right? You've got to get treatment and make it mandatory. You've got to have people get their lives back on track. And then the third one is mental health, where we don't have enough mental health beds, massively underprovided. So you go to, I'm on the road the whole time, and you talk to sheriffs, whatever. This is a real example. This, I think, was Sonoma County. The sheriff there said to me, half the people in his jails, half have severe mental health problems. That's where we're actually treating people with mental health. It's barbaric.
Right.
Why? Because they put the money into this corrupt, homeless industrial complex. There's plenty of money, but it's not gone to the actual services that you need, including what Newsom passed as his flagship homelessness thing in March 24, which and all this nonsense, nothing that actually gets people the treatment that they need. Then you have Prop 36, which we passed overwhelmingly in California. That was supposed to put more money into mental health. They haven't done that. And so there's money there that needs to be put into it. And there's a further specific thing that's very important people understand, which is one of these ridiculous. I remember I've worked inside of a government. I know how it works. All of these, you've got to understand these bureaucratic things that you've got to fix in order to solve a problem. And one huge problem is Medicaid, because a lot of this is low-income people that we're talking about. So it's all the funding flows, which in government, it's all about the funding. That determines what happens. The funding flows often through Medicaid, because it's low-income people. Medicaid has a rule that's been in place since it was set up in the 60s called the IMD rule, Institutions of Mental Disease. And the IMD rule, which was written at a time all very utopian, we don't want mental institutions, we don't want insane asylums, it's all very, we don't want any of that. So they have a rule which is that you don't get reimbursement, states are not reimbursed for any mental health facility with more than 16 beds. It's a really specific limit, 16 beds. Now, imagine if we had that for just healthcare generally, that no hospital could be bigger than 16 beds. Imagine how inefficient that would be. That's what's going on with mental health when it comes to Medicaid. Now, the first Trump administration actually created a waiver. It's called the IMD waiver that states could apply for. Well, guess what? The geniuses in California haven't applied for it. So, there's all these things we can, of course I would. So there's all these things that you can do to actually get the money to where it's needed. And it's also, 3 steps: enforce the law, get people treatment, massively increase mental health capacity. And then you can truly solve the problem. But this shouldn't exist, right? It's unacceptable. The way I always put it, we would never allow people we love to live in those conditions. So why do we tolerate this? And you don't see it anywhere else. It shames us, that's why the policy report I wrote is called "Ending Homelessness," because we should be able to do it, and that's exactly will be my attitude as governor.
And it's just as insidious as the gender affirming care thing. They call it harm reduction, or the safe injection sites and handing out all the materials.
All of that ideological nonsense has to go. It's got to be practical things to get people off the streets and get their lives back on track. That's it. By the way, Huntington Beach, and this is not some crazy, oh my gosh, how are you going to do that? Huntington Beach did it. That council I talked to, they reduced homelessness by 60% just in a couple of years by doing this kind of thing.
With all of the laws that are stacked against them.
Exactly.
And you take, what was it, $24 billion that they couldn't account for in the last 5 years?
Yes, that was the state auditor. So the state auditor report, again, it was a Republican member of the assembly that asked for this to be done. The state auditor did a report, $24 billion. That's right. Bigger than a lot of states' budgets total. And they couldn't spend, and they couldn't find where it went. And then again, they said the legislature said, we want a full detailed audit to find where it went. Newsom vetoed that. They passed. It's amazing when you actually look at what he's done. They passed, again, the Democrat-controlled legislature passed a bill in response to that 24 billion number and said, because the audit didn't say where, it just said, we can't find it, we don't know. And so they said, well, we want to know. We want a full detailed audit. And they passed a bill to do it. And Newsom vetoed it.
Yeah, they're doing the same thing with the high-speed rail. They don't want to know where.
Well, why? Because we know. Well, why else would you veto it other than guilty? Because you know that your corrupt donors are pocketing a lot of this cash.
100%. I mean, you got the Shangri-La guy.
Well, sorry, they're not. The donors are. The donors are just doing what they should. They just want what they want. It's the politics. Your corruption is what they're trying to hide.
Well, and the NGOs as well. Like you had the Project Home Key thing that was supposed to take dilapidated hotels and renovate them and turn them into, affordable housing for the homeless. And then you got, the guy from Shangri-La who's paying off his AMX bill, buying a Maserati or whatever, and flying to Tahiti or God knows where.
Yeah, there's so much of this. It's disgusting. And this is what, it's a classic. This is what you get with, one-party rule. It's now 16 years of one-party rule. They get totally complacent, totally arrogant and corrupt. They think that they can get away with anything because they kind of have got away with anything. The media are complicit in all this. They don't really dig in. That's why the California Post, was just chatting just before I came on, that I just had to, a little bit late because I had to respond to a story that they're doing. Really big deal that we've now got a really aggressive media outlet that's holding these people accountable in California. It hasn't happened for years, and this is the corruption of one-party rule, and this has been going on and on and on, and it's disgusting. And it's they're stealing taxpayer money, and you hear these non-profit leaders. This is the homeless industrial complex. It's basically the politicians, the affordable permanent supportive housing developers. That's a racket that they're in on the thing, and the non-profit leaders. You got people. In LA, I was being told stories. These non-profit leaders paid, on the CEO of two separate ones, taking home a salary of $1 million for each one. Mm-hmm. The other corruption that goes we could talk all show just about this. In LA, for example, they keep passing these taxes. So they passed a sales tax increase, I think it was. No, sorry, it was the mansion. I mean, they are also raising the sales tax for other things. They passed a mansion tax increase that was like a tax on expensive homes, not that expensive because housing has gone up so much. And the people who put it on the ballot, who paid to get the signatures to get it on the ballot in LA, are the beneficiaries of the ballot initiative. So they literally pay to put a tax on Angelenos, and the tax revenue goes back to them. It's just unbelievable, the corruption.
Yeah, and so the housing part of this. So yes. They try to conflate the two issues, which it actually frustrates me because I'm 42 years old. I was born and raised in California, raised in San Jose, born in Los Gatos. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains here. Yeah. No matter how much I make good money, I make around $110,000 a year. You would think that I would own my own home. You'd think I'd be able to own my own home, but no matter how much of a raise I get, the cost of living just keeps jumping.
Well, I'll just tell you, you say that, and that's right. You'd think in any normal world. I don't know the latest number. The last time I looked at it, there were 6 counties in California where literally an income level of 100,000 was for the purposes of their official, data and welfare payments and whatever, classified as low income.
It's under 108,000. It's under 108,000 here in the county that I live in.
Right. Well, there you are. I mean, it's just insane, and it's the cost of living, which is entirely driven by their policy agenda. That's what it's nothing else.
Well, and one of the things that it took me a long time to realize this with housing, it's sort of a catch-22 because you have a ton of homeowners in California, and one of the primary reasons you buy a home is because it increases equity. So, that's one of the main reasons. The thing is, if you build more homes and you have more supply on the market, housing values aren't going to go up, or they may even go down because you have more inventory now. And I mean, Trump actually just talked about this. He was like, we want to protect the equity of homeowners, but at the same time, we want to make housing more affordable. Well, it's like, you can't really. Well, I don't know about that.
I've got to wade through that. Let me just talk to this. I spent a lot of time, and in fact, housing was the first issue, housing, not homelessness, but housing, that I really looked at when I was getting in, because remember that most of my career has been either in business. I've started various types of worked in business, started companies. My first job was project manager for a construction company. So I know this, I care about this very much. It's in my blood. My stepfather worked construction. I used to go out and literally build houses, help with that. So, and, most of my career I've been doing things, working in business, starting my own companies, including restaurants back in the day in England, or working for a while in the government trying to make change happen. So for all those years that I was a host of a TV show, which I loved. It was an amazing opportunity to host a show on Fox News on Sunday nights. But it was increasingly, I wanted to get back to doing things, not just talking about things. And the first issue I looked at was housing. And in fact, I tried to get a ballot initiative on the statewide ballot to deal with some of the things that are driving up housing costs. But to this specific point of the values that I don't really. There's a couple of things we need to say. It is true that there's a sort of basic supply and demand thing going on, and that's one of the reasons why one of the main drivers of the high housing costs, and high housing costs, highest in the country. One of the main reasons people are leaving California, including young people, the exact people we want to stay here, we're going to sort of build the future, raise families here, start businesses, do amazing things, and they're being driven out. Now, there's a couple of things we need to say. First of all, we wouldn't have such a supply-demand problem and a housing crisis were it not for two factors. Number one, illegal immigration. So you've got a lot of people here shouldn't be here. And so that obviously impacts the housing supply and demand equation.
And the H-1B situation in big tech as well.
Right. And then you have another thing which isn't talked about enough, which is renting, where you've got all these rent controls and all these things, tenants' rights and everything, gone so far in that direction that you've got, the last time, again, I looked at the data, it was definitely over 1 million empty properties in California, empty units. Now, of course, some of them are second homes and whatever, and I don't begrudge that. People do well. Good luck. It's America. We want you to do well. As long as everyone has the chance to climb the ladder of opportunity, good luck to you. But if you if you didn't have these restrictions on renting and protections for tenants that have gone way too far in the other direction, you'd free up more units for rent. That's just a fact that I'd want to look at. But even with all of that being said, I think we should be building more, because in California, how have we grown? What if you think back to the golden age of California, the California dream? It's all about that lifestyle, the single family home lifestyle.
1,500 square feet, backyard, front yard, 2-car garage. Yeah.
That's what California is. Okay, and it's different to New York or London, wherever. It's just that's what we are. And I've always believed you've got to go with the grain of human nature and what people want. That's what you want in California. And so right now there's a war on single family homes. You can't build single. They make it incredibly difficult with all these ridiculous bureaucratic restrictions. Endless of them. VMT, vehicle miles traveled. If you build single families, more driving. That's terrible. I don't even want to bore everyone with the details. Right? There's
the materials they force. Yeah.
Endless things. Right. And one of the main driving things underlying this housing crisis is the left's climate crusade. And they want everyone. There's this vision of everyone living in apartments, in urban density, no cars, walking, cycling, public transit. This is what they want. And so all of these policy things are driving in that direction. And then I have to say, first of all, if you go any further, is that how they live? The people pushing this nonsense. Right. Is that how, does Gavin Newsom live in an apartment? Does Nancy Pelosi, now, well-earned retirement, is she going to be trundling around San Francisco on transit? Of course not. It's total elitism. They don't live like that. They have their nice houses with the yard and all the rest of it and the swimming pool, but they don't want the sort of little people to do that. They're going to shove everyone in boxes in apartments. So it's disgusting elitism. That's the first point. Second point, they talk about density. Well, if you look up the numbers, and there's varying, like I was actually with the Building Industry Association the other day, and I always cite the number of, well, it's still, whatever your exact number, I'm going to say the percentage of our land that's developed in California is the lowest in the country. In other words, we have the highest density. The number I used to cite is 5%. They say it's 6%, 6.6 or something. But whether it depends whether you include roads and all this kind of stuff. It's still the lowest in the country. And so There's plenty of land. Like we did a back of the envelope calculation for this policy report on housing that you can read at goldentogether.com, which is that if you increased the proportion of our land that was built on by 1%, we'd still be pretty much the lowest in the country. In other words, the highest density in the country, but there would be room for 10 million new single family homes on quarter-acre lots. We have so much space. I'm on the road the whole time in California, and this is not about ruining our beautiful open spaces that I love and our state parks and wilderness.
Right.
Of course not. I love that. I'm a huge environmentalist in the old-fashioned sense of conservation and loving nature. And I love our farmers and the Central Valley. I'm there all the time, and I want to protect our farmland, and it makes me sick that farmland's being ripped out, the most fertile farmland in the world, and replaced with solar farms or even housing developments. But there's so much space to build where there's nothing, and and so we've got to kind of fight that ideology of density. That's one thing. And then you get into all these specific things that make it so expensive, just as you touched on. The building materials. I mean, the big part of that is that we're not foresting timber hardly anymore in California. We used to get most of it from our own forests. Now, because there is really extreme environmentalism, we're not managing the forest properly. We're not taking timber out. Our lumber industry has been decimated, and that's causing problems in rural communities up in the Sierras and whatever. But we're still using it. We're now trucking it in from Oregon and Canada. It's insane. So you've got materials costs, you've got building codes that get more and more onerous every single year with ridiculous layers of, it's all driven by climate, right? You've got to do this, you've got to do that, endless bullshit. And the process, the environment, the reviews and the engineering reports, all this kind of bureaucracy that's been layered on. And then on top of that, you've got impact fees. That's another thing no one knows about. Developer impact fees, which are basically a tax on housing that is paid by the house builder, and obviously goes into the price. The Turner Center at Berkeley, which is like, they compile all this data on housing. They estimate that now it's up to 20% of the price of a house is fees. Which is basically taxes. And it used to be that it's a couple of grand here and there and helps pay for the park or whatever. By the way, you already pay local taxes to pay for that stuff. Now it's just off the charts. One of my my ballot initiative was to cap impact fees at 3% of the construction cost. Often it's like 20%, so whatever. I could go on and on. I'm sorry. I'm just...
No, it's fine. Like Adam Carolla is doing a lot of coverage of what you're talking about right now. And it's not just the fees. It's the amount of time it takes for them to approve fees.
Exactly right.
You said so many things there that could take it in like one or two directions, but like what you said about the lumber industry, like I lived in San Lorenzo Valley up here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and that is originally a logging town. And then they made it like it is a sin against God to cut down a redwood tree. Right. And then in 2020, we had these massive
terrible fires. Exactly.
And I lived through them. I was evacuated for 5 weeks. And of course, so I had to go rent a hotel, and they're charging $200 a night. It was a nightmare. That was a nightmare.
It's so sad. We used to go camping a lot in Big Basin.
That's what burned down. I lived right down the street from there. I run there all the time.
Wow.
I grew up going to Big Basin.
When we first moved here with the boys, we go camping up there, and you love that. You get up there and you drive in, and it's just magnificent.
Yeah, and the old cabin that they had,
right.
That's gone. It's getting better. It's opening back up, but you still can't. Luckily, I mean, I don't want to make any of this about me, but I was fortunate enough to run the Skyline Big Basin to the Sea Trail down past Berry Creek Falls 2 weeks before those fires.
Oh my goodness!
That was those fires were probably like the most difficult time of my life. I was going through a lot.
I can imagine.
Right in the middle
of.
No, my house didn't burn down. I'm renting, but it was a night. I have friends that lost their homes, and one of them didn't rebuild. You know what? I met a guy at the laundromat, and it was right after the fires, maybe 6 weeks after they lifted the evacuation orders. And I start talking to him, and just shooting the shit. And he tells me, "It's like, yeah, my house burned down. Me and my daughter are living out of an RV at Costco right now." And I have to try not to get choked up when I tell the story, because he starts telling me a story about how much red tape he's dealing with to be able to rebuild his house. And he was like, they cleared the property so I can like get back on the property, but they won't allow me to bring my RV back onto the property to build a house. And he bursts into tears, and he says, all I want to do is give my daughter her own bedroom. And it's all because he's dealing with this bureaucratic
Bureaucratic.
nonsense.
Exactly.
And it's his own property.